Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing. I'm Brian Calley, CEO of the Small Business Association of Michigan.
And I'm Kelly Saunders, Vice President of Policy and Engagement, filling in for Sarah Miller today, who is doing her duty as jury duty. So she misses all of you, but she is performing that today. We are going to welcome a new member to the SBM ranks. Welcome to Kingfisher Recruiting, and Derek Hilbert and his team are VIP members. Kingfishers are apparently hard to find, which is quite applicable when you're coming to recruitment, and so that is a very catchy name. Welcome to Derek and the team of Kingfisher Recruiting. Brian, we're going to kick off our programming today with what was the news of the week. Should actually say the last few weeks when it comes to the budget. And so let's give a breakdown to the crew on what happened with the state budget last week. It makes sense to start with taxes. So, what were the big moves that small business owners need to know? We can probably start with decoupling and cannabis because it kind of gave it a soft landing when it came to tips over time and Social Security.
Yeah, there were several, not unusual for there to be tax changes to go along with the budget. So the budget document itself is what spends the money, but then there's what they call budget implementation bills that come along with those spending decisions. And this year there were some substantial changes in the tax code. The first one I'll cover is decoupling. And what this is, for the first time ever, Michigan is separating out from the federal tax code. At the federal level, earlier this year, they passed accelerated depreciation tools, the ability to amortize research and development expenses, or well, expense them in the year that they occur, as opposed to amortizing them over 5 years. Those changes automatically flow through to the state's tax base as well for corporate and individual income taxes. And the state decided to separate out, in other words, to make it such that the federal tax code, for the purposes of accelerated depreciation, especially, and research and development expenses, is separate. So it adds a level of complexity for certain to the state tax code, but also it means that unfortunately our domestic businesses will be at a bit of a disadvantage compared to some of the other states around the country. About 40 states are together with the federal tax code, and this decoupling means those incentive tools will not be available to them, at least not at the same level they are in other states. So that's the first change. Second, the biggest hit was the cannabis industry, so marijuana industry, adding a wholesale tax of 24%. There's already a 10% tax plus the 6% sales tax. You add all this together, you're getting up there, 40% taxes on the industry, and it's the industry is not doing particularly well. This is an important part of the overall framework for the road funding deal, and they're projecting that it will raise $420 million to put toward roads. Honestly, I think that's unlikely that it will raise that much, but that's what the estimate says. Just the industry is not, again, it's just not doing well. Adding a 24% wholesale tax on top of that is um, probably going to diminish the industry further, but then also it has a high likelihood of pushing more of the purchases into the black market away from the regulated market. Um, Now, on the other side of the ledger, in terms of tax benefits, the state did decide to match the federal government's new policies on making reported tips exempt from income taxes and overtime exempt from income taxes. In addition to Social Security, although I will say Michigan already had senior exemptions that covered the vast majority of Social Security. So in other words, most Social Security was already exempt, but this makes sure that just those on the margins, those that maybe weren't totally covered by it, the previous exemptions get fully exempt. So big changes on taxes overall. There's some other shifts too in the road funding plan, but not the types of shifts that would have much of a direct impact on business.
So you just mentioned the road funding plan, and that played a huge part in the budget negotiations that started even back in the spring, you could argue. We know that Governor Whitmer has made roads a central piece of everything she does since she took office, and sometimes it's been bumpy, sometimes there has been traction, but it was really a crux of the part of the deal was that there was going to be no budget without a road funding plan. And so talk about that a little bit, and when do we even expect to see results on what came from the funding that was allocated in this budget process for road funding?
There'll be about $1 billion in additional road funding early, and then it'll ramp up in this plan 1.8 billion. But you got to keep in mind that at the same time, the money that the governor borrowed 5 years ago, it's at the tail end of that. So that will be falling off. So it prevents the cliff. The new plan prevents the spending from falling off too much, but it doesn't actually, it's not a net increase of those gross numbers that I just mentioned because one will be falling off, the other coming in. Um, so in that sense, you're not going to see you probably are not going to see a huge difference in road surface conditions, but for the fact that they also changed what types of roads will get fixed with the money. And I think that's probably a bigger impact than the total dollar amount. They're definitely favoring local roads more than in the past. So in the past, there's what they call Public Act 51. It decides where, gas taxes, they go on the top of this formula and it gets distributed. This now they've created road funds that go toward local roads with specific buckets, and then a pretty substantial increase, very substantial increase for public transit as well. So the road funding, I would say road funding is probably the biggest winner in this budget, that cliff being prevented, but especially local roads, as opposed to what we've seen for the last 4 or 5 years, has been an emphasis more on the I roads and the M roads, the highways. Overall, I don't think you're gonna notice a big overnight shift, but um, probably more of a slowing of the depreciation or the deterioration of the roads.
So leading into that, it looks like schools got a pretty healthy bump when it came to the budget. And we know that actually that gas tax that you just talked about and the shifting of things, some of that was actually pushed towards schools. And so can you talk about a little bit how that changed in the formula of the budget? And if there is going to be more money put towards schools, we know that schools have had a rough time with outcomes and our students have been not on quite the trajectory that we want them to be nationwide. Do we expect that to change with this allocation?
Well, so road funding went up, and certainly I think schools, while they're disappointed with how long it took for them to get the budget done, or the school funding has gone up. The There really weren't any changes in practices contemplated here. So in other words, accountability measures, curriculum improvement, different targeted investments to help with student achievement. I would say that's probably the biggest surprise in this budget is that it was a substantial increase in education funding, but not really tied to anything um, that would lead you to believe that outcomes are going to be substantively different. So definitely something on the to-do list that has been kind of a slow-moving crisis in the way that funding has been going up, but educational performance has continued to slide, especially compared to our peers, other states. So this is a particularly important point. I'm sure that more money always helps, but in terms of outcomes, there really wasn't anything in the budget that would lead me to believe that outcomes are going to be substantively changed.
And we have a new superintendent here in Michigan. The former Michael Rice has officially retired, and there'll be new leadership at the Michigan Department of Education. So definitely be something to watch as that department specifically turns over. There was another piece in the budget that was a little bit quieter, called the insurance providers assessment. And we were in the middle of that a little bit in figuring out what to do when it comes to processes. There was something that brought it into conflict with the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. So can you maybe talk about what the insurance providers assessment is and how that may affect employers as we move forward?
Michigan has for quite some time now instituted an insurance premiums assessment that collects money to use as a Medicaid match. So the state has put up some money and it draws down federal dollars to pay for the Medicaid program. The feds are disallowing how Michigan does that today. And so what the legislature did is they passed a bill that says, okay, if the governor, they've asked the governor to go to the feds and ask for a waiver, ask the government, the federal government, to allow Michigan to continue doing what it has done in the past, which is an assessment that is heavily weighted toward Medicaid HMOs and not private insurers. So the feds have officially disallowed that. State's going to ask for a waiver. If the answer to that question is no, then the legislature pre-authorized the governor to issue an across-the-board assessment on all insurance, which would be like 2 or 3%. And we are concerned about this, that health insurance costs have been rising quite a bit. Whatever that rise is, this would just be added on top of that. And so the state would collect the money from all health insurance payers, whether they're individuals or businesses buying it for their employees, and then use that money to draw down federal dollars to pay for the state's Medicaid program. We are concerned about this. The state was definitely in a tough spot because the feds disallowed the previous practice. And we can hope, and I do hope, that the feds allow the previous practice to continue because it has a very small impact on private sector employers. That will go to a big impact on private sector employers. And but it's all in the Fed's hands right now, because the legislature has already can pre-authorize the governor to take action, depending on what the federal answer is. So we are kind of bracing for the possibility that what's already a tough year and insurance premiums increase might get a little worse.
We will definitely be watching that and reporting back on what happens next in that specific space, as it was kind of more quiet under the radar during this process, but one we were definitely paying attention to. We did have a few programmatic items that we were watching within the budget that we engage in, always advocate for in this process. And so, Brian, I'm just going to bring up a few topics, and if you want to touch base on those, we'll run through those quickly. Let's start with PureMichigan.
PureMichigan, unfortunately, has been cut. So um, it was 25 million is kind of what our standard for what we consider full funding. Has been higher than that in the past, but we think it needs at least that much to do what it has done in the past. Inexplicably, this, which is the crown jewel of state tourism brands in the anywhere in the country and among the tops in the world, it's kind of fallen out of favor here in Michigan. Everybody else is jealous about it, but here in Michigan, it's fallen out of favor. So unfortunately, PureMichigan was reduced, and reduced to a level that you'll notice. That tourism is one of the big three industries in Michigan. We continue to support wholeheartedly PureMichigan, and we'll hope to see a reversal of this reduction in the future, because we'd rather see them double down and tell the Michigan story under what is the strongest by far state brand in the country.
Next was Going Pro.
Going Pro is a job training program where it's a public-private partnership. Private sector might have a cohort of people that need a particular credential or training. They work together, usually with like a community college, but it could be other job training organizations. And Going Pro subsidizes, supports that job training, and the people at the end of the day get better jobs because of it. And that is very popular. There's always more demand every year. There's more demand than what there's resources allocated for, unfortunately. And it's wildly successful. It's survived over multiple administrations, but it did get a $22 million hit or reduction this year. And a lot of these things, I think they're just kind of casualties of the road funding package. There's just a determination, you got to put more into roads. And so there are a lot of things that we think were probably actually better investments that they got reduced. This is definitely one of them.
Let's talk about small business support hubs, which our foundation is heavily involved in, and we've been excited about this work over the last year specifically.
Yeah, there are 27 different small business support hubs, and one of those is the SBAM Foundation. And there were some previous federal dollars that came out of what was called ARPA funding that we're at the tail end of. And so the governor had requested an additional $10 million next year, which is a lot smaller program than what's been in the past, but an appropriate amount in our judgment. And the legislature did approve that. Actually went with $11 million, so slightly more. Really good work that happens in the hubs. There's a lot of different hubs. Ann Arbor Spark is one of them, and 20 Fathoms in Kalamazoo, and Lake Superior Community Partnership, and the West Michigan Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. A lot of great hubs doing a lot of great work all around the state. And we were very happy to see that survive all the cuts that were necessary to put into roads.
Before we wrap up this piece of our conversation, there were a few other things that were kept intact. The Tri-Share program, which focuses on childcare, a third, and a third, employer, state, and then the employee, obviously helping with affordability when it comes to childcare. Reconnect, which is another workforce program that we've supported heavily, got $52 million. And that helps get people in to get credentials towards that 60 by 30 goal that we've been a part of as well. One of the things that we are sad about is that for our Center for Social Enterprise Development project that we started this year, did not receive funding, but maybe you want to go into that a little bit to round out this part of the conversation.
Yeah, there's a really cool thing happening out there in the economy, and these are what we call social enterprises. They're people that start businesses with a different motive other than profit motive. They're looking to solve some sort of a social problem out there, and to use entrepreneurship and use their business acumen to do it. And so think of like classic example, you might have a coffee shop that exists to hire people with disabilities, so people with disabilities can have a job. Really cool stuff like that. We've noticed that there are more and more of these social enterprise style businesses that are popping up, and we think there's something special happening there. And we're determined to keep on serving them. But we had started the Center for Social Enterprise Development with an eye toward really establishing the best practices, really getting to know these types of businesses and what makes them successful, and then to build on that. So that work will continue, just in a different form.
All right, and lastly, all the headlines were about a reduction of 1,800 positions in state government. And so, talk more about the office work and state employees coming back. We know that a lot of leases were not renewed a long time ago with COVID. And so, what does this mean? And then I'll let you roll into the next part of our conversation today.
Yeah, so to round out our budget discussion, there were some headlines about 1,800 eliminations of positions in state government, although the governor did say that there will be no layoffs. And so what this means is that for an organization as big as the state of Michigan, there's always a bunch of empty positions. And those positions are being eliminated. And as more positions, people retire or whatever, they'll eliminate more until they hit 1,800. So there won't be any layoffs from the state as a result of that. It was kind of I would say, a sensational headline, but not one that is, what's actually happening is a lot less sensational than what you would think looking at the headline. The other thing is the idea of like calling 80% of the state's workforce back to the office. Um, but that's not happening either. I think it's a misinterpretation of what was negotiated in this budget. What they actually negotiated was 80% occupancy of the buildings. And so in a recent interview, the governor had kind of further clarified or explained that what that means, we can actually reduce the number of offices that they have, not to call people back in. Essentially, I mean, maybe they'll do some of that too, but occupancy will go up by reducing the number of percentage, by reducing the number of offices that the state has, not by calling people back in to the office. Okay, so we have a very long-standing partnership with DTE, and it's about energy efficiency and reducing energy costs. It goes back, actually, I think it goes back to maybe 2017 or 2018, that SBAM has worked closely with both DTE and consumers um, on small businesses accessing energy efficiency services. And so we have Allison Jaworski, who is joining us today from DTE to talk a little bit about those offerings. And so, Allison, first thank you for joining us. But let's start out. We decided to go ahead and highlight it this month because this is Energy Efficiency Month. And so tell us about that, what that is, what it means, what do our members need to know?
Right. Thank you for having me, Brian. My name's Allison Jaworski. I'm the program manager of our small business program here at DTE. And Energy Efficiency Month started all the way back in 1991. And the U.S. just wants to promote the efficient use of energy, renewable energy, and clean climate, or, reducing our greenhouse gases. So DTE, obviously, that's in core alignment with our mission, and that's why we're happy to promote it and glad to be here today.
All right, excellent. Well, so let's talk about energy efficiency itself. So, these words get thrown around a lot, but people don't necessarily know what it means. The so what is energy efficiency? How are the what are the benefits if somebody's hasn't doesn't know about this or would like to plug into it? What are the benefits to really taking energy efficiency seriously?
Right. So I like to say energy efficiency, it's all about making the most efficient use of any type of equipment or operation that you have, because the energy that you don't use obviously is the cheapest source of energy. So you design, your system that you're most efficient. So let's say I have old fluorescent lighting and I switch to LED, I could save about 30% of my usage of electricity there. It's also very important because there's cost savings associated to it. We know like a lot of small businesses obviously are very busy focusing on staffing or inventory or, like you said, tax or legislative concerns, but a real controllable line item on their income statement is their utility bills. So by kind of bringing that up top of mind, they can put back a significant amount of operating cash into their financial statements. So it's really good for Michigan businesses to kind of consider that top of mind, something that might not really have been in the forefront for them.
Great. So let's just get into it then. What does DTE offer to help businesses reduce their energy use?
So specifically for our small business customers, what we have is at no cost to them. If you're a DT electric or a DT gas customer, we have an assessment where an energy advisor, once you schedule that assessment, it's really easy. You just call our 1-800 number or go to our website. An advisor comes out and will, on the spot at that appointment, install free of charge LED, some basic lighting installations, exit signs, a programmable thermostat, maybe air purifier if it's in need of one, or for gas customers, pipe wrap, faucet areas, those kinds of things. And at that time, when they're out there doing the assessment and doing the installation, they can also identify if there seems to be other project opportunities. Like I said, maybe you didn't do the outdoor lighting or you need some like controls on your HVAC system. At that point, the advisor can recommend, additional steps to take over and above those free install items and then go from there. And if the customer chooses to do a project, when they do so, DTE incentivizes them or will give them a rebate, which is just a direct check back to help defray the cost of those projects. And depending on, the rebate level, it can be substantial. It could be maybe possibly half, 30% of the project cost.
Yeah, this is one thing we always say is if you've got if you've got a project that you're doing for it might not even be for energy efficiency. If you're doing any sort of construction on your space, please reach out to us or DTE if you're in their territory to learn about which of those costs that you're going to face anyway could be covered by these energy efficiency rebates. So Allison, here's a question that comes up from time to time because people hear about this and it sounds kind of fishy. Like, so DTE wants to help me buy less of what they sell. Like to a person whose job is to sell thing, their whole audience, they have businesses, they want to sell more and more of what it is that they produce, any good or service. Why does DTE do this?
Well, DT, as I said, we're committed to environmental stewardship. In fact, we have a clean vision plan, which will lay out the roadmap for us to be net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And energy efficiency is one of those pillars to get there, on top of our renewable portfolio, on top of some of our more clean plant generations. But like I said, if the customers are using the energy in the most efficient way possible, DT, we don't have to continue to generate excess, energy that like the entire state has to burden. It's just efficient at the end use of the customer. So we have like a definitely inherent interest in promoting it. And we also, like I said, know it's good for our customers, it's good for our economy, and it's good for our grid and our system.
Yeah, expanding energy production is extremely expensive. And so it does make sense like to optimize the assets you currently have available in addition to DTE's really what I call remarkable transformation from 20 years ago when I was in the state house, um, looking at the portfolio and how energy was generated back then today, it would have seemed like a fairy tale, like that big of a transformation could happen in such a short period of time. But technology has changed so much. All right, so what if somebody's watching right now and they're like, "Oh shoot, I just did something last year and I didn't even know about this." What then?
Right, right. So we're excited to say right now we have a very special promotion going on. So if a customer installed a project and it could be dated all the way back to January 1st of 2023, give us a call because we can take a look at that project. And if we can, identify that there's the verifiable savings and you have, invoices to support that, we can possibly give you a rebate for that. So customers, don't miss out on the opportunity if they haven't heard about it. And that I would recommend calling our 1-800 number and, talking to an energy advisor and describing what work you had done. And that number is 1-855-748-2525. And just, talk about what you did. If you did lighting, if you maybe replaced a HVAC system or a furnace or a boiler, give us a call and we can see what we can do.
Yeah, excellent. So you haven't necessarily missed your opportunity if it was very recent that you did something that improved your energy efficiency. And really, if you replace something that was very old, chances are, the whatever you replaced it with was an improvement. So it's worth checking out. Doesn't cost anything to do it either. So we're strong partners here at SBAM with DTE as well. In fact, we've got a full-time staff person, and all he does all day, every day, are energy assessments and helping people connect with these programs. So you heard the 1-800 number. You can also contact SBAM and we can connect you as well and go over projects and make sure that you're asking the right questions and maximizing your opportunities. Allison, thank you so much for joining us today and for your longstanding partnership and commitment to reducing costs for small businesses.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, Brian, to round out our conversation, there is a new U.S. Supreme Court session beginning. So, what are the big cases that could be impacting our members?
All right, three things. There are three cases. There's a lot of as big, huge kind of constitutional issues before the Supreme Court. It's going to be one of the more interesting sessions in probably a generation. But basically, there are three in particular that I think people in business are going to be pretty interested in. First is what authority does the president have to establish and set tariff rates? So right now, the president is setting rates based on emergency powers from a very old act, an act that's older than me. And I mean, not that I'm that old, but it's not, this is nothing new. Presidents have been changing and establishing tariff rates for a long time. What's different now is without Congress. But what's different now is the scale and kind of the scope across the board changes that are being made. So now this question is being asked, and the Supreme Court will weigh in. Where does the president's powers over tariffs begin and end? And it is an appropriate question to ask. I think this is one that, frankly, should have been asked a long time ago, and so now is before them. The next is the there are certain agencies that have regulatory powers, and these agencies, some of them by tradition are quite independent, even if they're presidentially appointed. And so there's one case. It's the leader of the Federal Trade Commission, who is of the opposite party of the president, that was fired or attempted to be fired. And so, can somebody be fired from that job based on a policy difference? And again, and this is kind of an interesting question. In the past, when you don't line up with the president, usually people do resign, but there's been less of that. There's just more confrontation all the way around on these things. So, in terms of firing people, where does the president's power begin and end? You'll see a theme to really, I think this whole term is all about presidential powers. And then, and then the last one is one that we've actually featured quite a bit, the Federal Reserve. The president would like to fire Lisa Cook, who is one of the Federal Reserve directors on the board. And there was an issue with, she had two mortgages, both under the primary residence mortgage system, and you can only have one primary residence. And if you mark them as your primary residence, you get better terms. It's what gives you access to like the 20 and 30-year term mortgages. And so that was discovered, and so there was an attempt to fire this member of the Federal Reserve Board of Directors. Again, always traditionally has been considered like an independent agency. Does the president have the authority to fire somebody on that board for a reason like that? And that's it's just not happened before. So these are some areas that, like with the Federal Reserve, they set interest rates. With the regulatory commissions and whether or not they turn over, if they can turn over in the direction of the president, and the tariff authority, three areas where there's business consequences to whatever the answers to these questions are. So I would say buckle up for this Supreme Court session. This is going to be a doozy.
Well, I have no doubt that you'll keep everybody updated. I'm going to just mention two events that we have coming up. One this week, Thursday, in Oakland County, our owner-to-owner meeting. We will be at the Holocaust Memorial Center. We invite you to be with us. Go to our website in order to register or contact our events team, and we will make sure you're taken care of. And then next week, Thursday, we'll be in Wayne County in downtown Detroit at Social Brews. Invite you to join us there too. We never have a lack of things for you to attend to continue to stay updated. And that's our programming for today. So thanks so much for joining us. We hope you have a great week.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.